close your eyes now and let us drift back, far beyond the memory of stone, beyond the glimmer of the first campfire, back to the silent, suffocating non-place that the Greeks called chaos, a yawning void, formless and cold, where nothing was and nothing could be. It was not darkness, for darkness implies the absence of light, but chaos was the absence of everything, only a vast, endless emptiness that hummed with a low, imperceptible vibration, the sound of potential waiting to be born. Imagine the texture of that original non-existence, not liquid, not gas, but perhaps a sensation akin to sinking into an infinite depth of velvet dust, without scent, without sound, yet possessing a profound, heavy loneliness. It was out of this very loneliness, out of this utter lack of definition, that the first stirrings of separation began, a slow, agonizing process of the void recognizing itself, and in that recognition the first entities crystallized into being. The most formidable and defining of these firstborn was Gaea, the magnificent earth. Feel the sudden warm weight settling beneath you, the slow cooling of cosmic energy into solid matter. She was the firm foundation, the deep-seated stability emerging from the swirl. Her substance was rough, mineral-rich, the scent of damp, unworked clay and cold obsidian, carrying the faint metallic tang of deep ore. Gaea was immediate, encompassing, the great mother whose sleeping curves would become the mountain ranges, and whose deepest breaths would carve out the valleys. But Gaea could not be alone. Her essence demanded contrast, a boundary, and so immediately above her stretched the immense, shimmering dome of Uranus, the starry, eternal sky. His presence was a subtle pressure, a dizzying height of deep, midnight sapphire that smelled faintly of ozone and pure glacial ice. Uranus was not a light in the dark, but the majestic, overarching ceiling that confined and protected Gaea beneath him. Listen closely, and you might hear the soft, frictionless slide of his celestial body as he spun the constellations into their initial, perfect pathways. This coupling of earth and sky was a beautiful, overwhelming embrace. Gaea, solid and warm, Uranus, ethereal and cool. Yet it was an embrace too close, too complete. There was no space, no easy separation between the two. And in this tight, fertile fusion, the first monstrous children began to form, swelling within Gaea's deep, subterranean womb, a secret, terrible pressure building within the heart of the world. The earliest of these births were truly staggering. The mighty 100-handers, Hecatonchires, 50 massive heads, each gazing in a different direction, and 100 tirelessly moving arms, whose skin must have felt like moss-covered granite, smelling of damp rock and infinite patience. Their power was unimaginable, their strength the very foundation of geological force. And then came the 3 noble, terrible cyclopes, each one possessing a single, perfectly circular, blazing eye, the first concentrated light in the cosmos, radiating a quiet,
intense heat, the kind of heat one feels from a forge or a distant lightning strike. Uranus, the glorious father, looked upon these creations not with pride, but with a deep, paralyzing fear. His perfect celestial order was threatened by the sheer, unbridled power of his offspring. He was obsessed with maintaining the serene, untouched beauty of his sky, and these children were rough, powerful, and demanding of space. So, in an act of profound and chilling cruelty, Uranus forced his earliest sons back into the dark, silent chambers of their mother Gaea, deep into the realm of Tartarus. Imagine the muffled sound of their endless thwarted struggles, the shuddering of the bedrock as the 100-handers beat their many fists against the prison walls. Gaea felt every single movement, every seismic groan, every suffocating moment of their confinement. It was a pain beyond physical measure, the suffering of the foundation of existence itself. Her vast, sprawling body became heavy with sorrow and resentment, her earthy scent turning sour, metallic, and cold with a justified rage. She waited, silently, for the next wave of children to be born, hoping one would possess the courage and the will to break this cosmic injustice. These were the Titans, 12 formidable children, less monstrous in appearance, possessing intelligence and structure. 6 brothers, 6 sisters, beings whose skin might have felt like cooled marble, whose voices carried the smooth resonance of rushing river water. Oceanus, the boundless sea; Tethys, his watery consort; Hyperion, the burning father of light; Coeus, the intelligence, and among them the youngest and most ambitious, Kronos, the one whose spirit did not tolerate the oppression, the one whose eyes held the cold, calculating reflection of the stars. It was to Kronos that Gaea finally whispered her desperate plea, her voice a slow, grinding sound of shifting tectonic plates, a call for vengeance that permeated the very roots of the world. And as Gaea prepared the instrument of rebellion, a scythe forged of hard gleaming adamant, the metal must have felt impossibly cold in the young Titan's hand, its edge silently sharp, reflecting the oppressive dome of the sky above, waiting for the darkest, most vulnerable hour, the moment when the vast, sleeping Uranus would descend, oblivious to the treacherous ambition lying quietly beneath his celestial embrace.
The cosmic atmosphere, once thick with the boundless affection and fearful restraint of Uranus, now held a new, fragile tension. The air itself seemed to wait, tasting of Gaea's metallic, earthy vengeance and the chilling resolve of her youngest son, Kronos. The appointed hour arrived not with thunder, but with the deep, dreamlike silence of the cosmos, when Uranus, the great sky, descended in his habitual, overwhelming embrace to cover the entirety of Earth, a moment when his guard was down, wrapped in the velvety comfort of Gaea's presence. In the suffocating darkness, where the only sound was the slow, massive breathing of the sleeping Earth, Kronos moved. His youthful Titan body, honed by Gaea's pain, was fueled by a cold, righteous anger against his father's tyranny. He held the curved weapon, the adamant sickle, in his hands. Its texture must have been unnervingly smooth and dense, absorbing the little warmth in the subterranean air, leaving a phantom chill upon his palms. It was a weapon designed by sorrow, not by fire. The act itself was swift, silent, and final. A terrible severing that sent the very first shockwave of change rippling through existence. Imagine the sudden release of pressure, the monumental weight of the sky recoiling abruptly from the body of the earth. The moment the celestial dome sprang back, an infinite, exhilarating space opened up between Gaea and Uranus, and in that sudden vacuum, light, not the blazing sun yet, but the first hint of space and depth, poured in. From the mingling of the sky's essence and the damp, waiting earth, new, formidable entities arose, most terrifyingly the Furies, or Erinyes. Born of vengeance, their presence was not a sight so much as a horrifying, prickling sensation, a cold wave of inescapable guilt and endless retribution. Their hair like living snakes, their breath smelling of burnt sacrifice and ancient blood. They were the promise that cosmic injustice would never, ever be forgotten. But there was also a birth of incomparable beauty and serene mystery, where the cast-off essence drifted across the primordial sea, mingling with the salt and the foam, and from that froth, perfect and sublime, emerged Aphrodite. The texture of her skin must have been like the finest sea-polished pearl, cool and damp from the waters, carrying the intoxicating, subtle scent of distant myrtle and untouched saltwater purity. She was the first wave of gentle beauty to wash over the violent, raw landscape of creation, a quiet promise of desire and fertile life. With Uranus defeated and pushed to the periphery of the cosmos, Kronos ascended. The imprisonment of the terrifying hundred-handers and the masterful Cyclops was momentarily forgotten in the thrill of revolution. This was the inauguration of the Golden Age, a time revered by mortals as one of effortless bliss. The air during this age was perpetually mild, the temperature always comfortable, never too hot, never too cold. Under the rule of Kronos and his consort, the Titaness Gaea, the world enjoyed a seemingly perfect harmony. The texture of the ground was soft beneath bare feet. The crops grew spontaneously and abundantly, smelling sweetly of ripe grain and undisturbed wild meadows. The rivers flowed not with rush and crash, but with a smooth, silvery sound, carrying liquids that tasted sweet and pure. There was no need for toil, no pain, and perhaps most importantly, no grim shadow of death. The people who lived then did not die. They simply drifted away peacefully in their sleep, like exhaling a long, final breath. But power, especially stolen power, carries a cold, deep echo of fear. And Kronos, the silent revolutionary, was tormented by the memory of his own act. He had listened to his mother's plot and overthrown his father, and the whispers of that cosmic law soon began to haunt him. He knew, with the chilling certainty of fate, that a child of his would do to him exactly what he had done to Uranus. It was the first cyclical, inescapable lesson of the divine universe. As he and Gaea established their mighty courts, glistening towers that must have smelled of carved cedar and polished electrum, the shadow of paranoia began to lengthen. It started subtly,
a sudden involuntary flinch at the distant rumble of thunder, a cold sweat that broke out despite the temperate air. He began to watch Rhea with an unsettling intensity, his once resolute eyes now clouded with suspicion. The Golden Age, despite its superficial splendor, was built on a fault line of terror. It was a time of abundance, yes, but also a time when a ruler listened constantly for the first faint sound of the next generation's rebellious march. The sweet, gentle scents of the world were slowly being overpowered by the subtle, metallic tang of dread. The cycle of violence had momentarily paused, but its terrible magnetic force was already gathering strength in the depths of Rhea's fertile womb, ready to give birth not just to new gods, but to a prophecy that would shatter the peace of the Titans forever, and plunge the cosmos into the most terrible war it had ever known. The scent of betrayal was already on the evening breeze.
The Golden Age was beginning to tarnish, the gentle sunlight of Kronos' reign obscured by the thick, choking cloud of his private anxiety. Though the surface of the world enjoyed perpetual ease, a steady, warm temperature that kissed the skin, and the comforting scent of full bloom that never faded, the heart of the ruler was cold, rigid, and listening, always listening for the sound of his inevitable replacement. The prophecy, whispered from the deepest parts of Gaea's earth and the furthest reaches of Uranus' sky, was a poison in Kronos' perfect life. It spoke of a son, more cunning and infinitely stronger than the father, who would rise up and seize the adamantine throne just as Kronos had seized it from his own progenitor. This certainty was a crushing, invisible weight far heavier than the sickle he once wielded. Imagine the terrifying reality of Rhea, the great Titaness, as she began to bear Kronos' children. She was the essence of motherhood, fertility, and flowing life, yet her joy was instantly chilled by the terror in her husband's eyes. She gave birth to her first child, Hestia, the quiet spirit of the hearth, a delicate, warm presence whose soft skin must have smelled like new milk and gentle smoke. But as soon as the infant's quiet cry echoed in the Titan palace, a sound meant to herald peace, it instead triggered the volcanic eruption of Kronos' fear. His movements were swift, terrible, and devoid of affection. He did not raise a weapon. He used his own vast, divine mouth. Imagine the scene, the infant child, small and helpless against the colossal Titan form of Kronos. The horrifying sound of the child being violently, swiftly swallowed, not consumed by fire or sword, but simply ingested, to be held in the cold, cavernous depths of his Titan stomach, where they could never grow, never plot, and never ascend. The act repeated itself with chilling regularity. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, whose breath might have smelled like rich, damp earth. Then Hera, the future queen, whose skin was destined to feel like smooth, cool silk. Then the mighty brothers, Hades, already possessing the silent gravity of the deep earth. And finally, Poseidon, whose powerful, restless spirit smelled of ozone and churning salt water. One by one, they disappeared, becoming muffled, trapped sensations within the tyrannical king of time. Rhea's despair was a profound, silent pain that echoed across the cosmos. How do you mourn children who are technically still alive, yet horribly entombed within their own father? Her voice was trapped,
her tears perhaps smelling of bitter, concentrated rain. The grand, gilded halls of the palace must have felt like a suffocating cage, echoing only with the sound of Kronos' heavy, suspicious silence. The texture of her life became rough, unbearable, filled with the knowledge of every muffled breath her children took inside that horrible, living prison. Finally, with her 6th pregnancy, Rhea resolved to break the cycle. She appealed to her parents, Gaea and Uranus, the cosmic powers she knew had suffered injustice themselves. They heard her plea, a quiet, desperate whisper that traveled along the fault lines of the world, smelling faintly of desperation and new hope. They orchestrated her secret flight to the deepest, most protected corner of the world, the ancient, mysterious island of Crete, a place where the air was sweet with mountain herbs, and the sound of the ocean was a comforting, perpetual roar. It was here, in the secluded, whispering darkness of a sacred cave on Mount Ida, that her last son was born, the infant destined to be called Zeus. The birth was attended not by the terrifying silence of the palace, but by a chorus of watchful guardians. The goat Amalthea, whose creamy, sweet milk would nourish the infant, making his lips smell of wild mountain clover. And the Curates, mountain spirits, whose duty it was to mask the baby's cries. Imagine the sound in that cave. Every time the infant Zeus let out a fragile, tiny wail, the Curates would immediately begin their ritual, clashing their bronze spears against their shields with a harsh, rhythmic, deafening sound. Clang, clang, clang. It was a sound designed to terrify any listener, but it was also a protective shield, a wall of metallic sound ensuring that the fearful echo of the birth would never reach the distant ears of Kronos. When Rhea returned to the Titan palace, she carried not her son, but a long, heavy stone, carefully wrapped in the softest, most elaborate swaddling clothes. The texture of the stone must have been cold and rough beneath the delicate linen, but its bulk perfectly mimicked the weight of a well-fed infant. Kronos, his mind fogged by self-preservation and weary suspicion, did not hesitate. He simply took the bundle and with the familiar, terrible motion, swallowed the stone whole. The moment the cold, dead weight settled in his stomach, he felt satisfied, believing the prophecy finally defeated. But the prophecy was not defeated. It was merely sleeping, growing strong and safe in the sweet, hidden air of a Cretan cave, sustained by goat milk and the rhythmic, metallic clamor of protective shields. The thunder god was growing up in secret, and the sound of his revenge was approaching like a far-off, distant storm.
The years of hiding had transformed the infant Zeus into a magnificent, imposing young god. His skin, no longer smelling of goat's milk and mountain sage, now carried the sharp, exhilarating scent of high-altitude air and raw, barely contained electric energy. His spirit, forged in secrecy on the cool, protective mountain slopes, possessed a fierce intelligence and a boundless determination to right the cosmic wrong. The time for stealth had passed. The time for open confrontation had arrived. Zeus first sought out the ancient titaness Metis, the spirit of counsel and deep thought. She prepared a potent, bitter draught, an emetic disguised as a restorative drink. Imagine the dark, viscous liquid, smelling strongly of strange herbs and metallic earth, a taste that promised immediate and violent reversal. Zeus traveled back to the central palace, no longer as a hidden child, but as a confident, imposing cupbearer, using his charm and lineage to enter the paranoid orbit of Kronos. He presented the drought to the weary, perpetually anxious Titan king. Kronos, whose senses were dulled by years of unchallenged power and the dull, perpetual pressure of the stone in his belly, drank without suspicion. The effect was instantaneous and earth-shattering. The terrible, internal prison Kronos had fashioned began to rebel. With a deep, groaning sound that seemed to pull the sound out of the mountains themselves, Kronos convulsed and began to vomit forth his stolen children. One after the other, they emerged not as infants, but as fully grown, powerful deities who had merely been dormant. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon were born anew, covered in the clinging, thick remnants of their father's digestive dark, but bursting with monumental, bottled-up divine power. The atmosphere immediately thickened with the sudden presence of 5 new elemental forces. The Olympian siblings, reunited and galvanized by their shared, unique trauma, immediately recognized Zeus as their liberator and rightful leader. Their alliance was not just of family, but of absolute necessity. Their first strategic move was one of profound generosity and tactical genius, descending into the very depths of Tartarus, into the prisons where Gaea's first sons still suffered. Imagine that descent, the air growing thick, sulfurous and hot, the only light coming from the faint glow of tortured rock. It was there they found the massive, groaning figures of the Cyclops and the 100-handers, their skin cold and slick with damp, subterranean moisture, their voices a continuous low rumble of centuries-old misery. Zeus offered them freedom and honor. In gratitude, the Cyclops, those masterful smiths of primal energy, gifted the Olympians with the weapons that would win the war. Feel the astonishing heat emanating from the forge, the sharp, blinding white light. They created the sound of ultimate power, the crackling, unpredictable Thunderbolt for Zeus, a weapon that smelled purely of ozone and scorching, undeniable fate. For Poseidon, they crafted the magnificent trident, its prongs cool, smooth, and smelling of deep, tumultuous salt water. And for Hades, the terrifying helm of darkness, a smooth, cold cap that allowed the wearer to vanish, becoming nothing but a silent, chilling absence. The war that erupted, the Titanoctomy, was not a simple battle. It was a cosmic reordering, a 10-year relentless siege that pitted structured, focused divine power against the raw, immense, sprawling strength of the old elemental gods. The battlefield was centered around 2 massive forces. The Titans established on Mount Othrys, a range of silent, massive rock, and the Olympians establishing their base on the peak of Mount Olympus, its marble and snow smelling clean, sharp, and ambitious. Listen to the sound of the war's beginning, the colossal, grinding footsteps of the Titans shaking the foundations of the world. The wind, hot and dry, carrying the roar of Kronos as he commanded the vast forces of the older generation. But then, the answer, the sudden, terrifying shriek of Zeus's first fully unleashed Thunderbolt, a sound so complete, so absolutely final that it momentarily paralyzed the world. The air tasted metallic and electric, and the scent of the scorching, targeted lightning filled every valley and plain. This was not just fighting. It was the creation of the future, and the thunder's first echo signaled that the age of the silent revolution was over, and the age of the roaring storm had begun.
10 years. A decade is a mere whisper in the vastness of time. Yet for the cosmos, this period was an unending scream. The Titanomachy reached its desperate, grinding climax. The fighting had become a continuous cycle of destruction and divine regeneration, leaving the land scarred, the air smelling perpetually of burnt stone and residual sulfur, and the temperature fluctuating wildly between glacial cold and scorching heat. The Titans, led by the fierce but predictable Kronos, fought with the sheer, unbridled strength of primordial mass. Their attacks were slow, tremendous forces, like mountains being dragged across the plains. But the Olympians possessed the gifts of strategy, speed, and targeted, specialized power. They were perched high on Mount Olympus, a citadel of cool marble and blinding white snow, contrasting starkly with the rough, elemental redoubts of Mount Othrys. Zeus realized that brute strength alone, even with his Thunderbolt, would not suffice to break the Titan's ancient endurance. He needed the raw, foundational fury of his allies, the Hundred-Handers and the Cyclops, to truly overwhelm the enemy. He ordered the Hundred-Handers, Briareus, Cotus, and Gyes, to unleash their full, unimaginable force. Imagine the sound of it. 300 colossal arms moving in perfect, terrible coordination. Their skin rough as aged earth, their movements slow-motion destruction. They did not use weapons, they used the world itself. They began tearing the very peaks off the mountains surrounding the battlefield. The sound of massed stone being ripped from the earth was a noise unlike any other, a continuous deafening grind that shook the air out of the lungs. They hurled these massive boulders, the weight of entire ranges, down onto the Titan positions. They cast them with a terrible, silent accuracy, a ceaseless bombardment that crushed, deafened, and demoralized the Titan armies. The scent of pulverized rock hung heavy and choking over the landscape. The pressure was overwhelming, but the final, decisive blow was reserved for Zeus. He gathered all the power of his newly defined domain, the sky, the energy of all 10 years of war, focused into one perfect, terrible moment. The clouds gathered above Olympus, dark and heavy, smelling sharp and metallic like a coming blizzard, but radiating immense heat. When Zeus released his power, the cosmos cried out, not with a roar, but with a continuous, searing sonic tear. Hundreds of thunderbolts, guided by the focused Cyclops, struck the Titan stronghold simultaneously. The light was blinding white, obliterating all shadow, followed instantly by a heat so intense it vaporized the very moisture in the air. The Titans recoiled, their ancient, tough bodies scorched and reeling under this new, focused energy. The climax centered on the broken, exhausted figure of Kronos, confronted by his son, the very manifestation of the prophecy he had tried so desperately to thwart. He fought with a terrifying, hopeless fury, but he was already defeated, a victim of his own fear and the stone weighing him down. Zeus's final thunderbolt struck him, not to destroy, but to subdue. The energy wrapped around Kronos, cooling and hardening into unbreakable divine chains. With his leader incapacitated, the remaining Titans collapsed,
Their surrender was not accompanied by a sound of peace, but a chilling, universal sigh of exhausted earth. The victorious Olympians, cold and resolute, decreed their fate, eternal imprisonment. They chained the defeated Titans and cast them down into the deepest, most suffocating prison ever conceived, Tartarus, the chasm beneath the earth, beneath the underworld, a place where the air is perpetually stagnant. The only light is an eternal, faint gray gloom, and the temperature is a biting, inescapable cold. As a final terrifying threat, the victorious gods were immediately faced with a new, final challenge, Typhon, a gigantic serpentine monster, the last desperate child of Gaea, furious at the treatment of her sons. Typhon's roar was the sound of 1,000 volcanoes erupting, his body smelling of dragon's breath and catastrophic fire. Zeus had to fight this final terrifying behemoth alone, throwing the fiery mountain of Etna on top of him to finally, definitively bring peace to the cosmos. The mountain shook for the last time, and then an infinite, profound stillness settled upon the world. The war was over, and the victors stood ready to draw the lots that would define the next age of time.
A deep, restorative quiet has fallen across the world. The air, no longer thick with sulfur and the metallic scent of war, now carried the clean, sharp smell of fresh rain washing over scorched earth. The colossal, grinding noise of the Titanomachy has faded into a faint, geological hum, the sound of the world slowly settling back onto its foundation. The young Olympians, though victorious, were weary. They stood atop the newly designated center of the universe, the pristine, untouchable heights of Mount Olympus. The light here was eternal and golden, reflecting off the newly polished marble of their budding palaces. The texture of this divine realm was smooth, cool, and shimmering, the antithesis of the rough, violent domain of the Titans. They had triumphed over the brute force of their father, Kronos, but the universe was too vast, too sprawling, for one god to rule alone. To prevent a recurrence of the paranoia and inevitable tyranny that had plagued the previous 2 ages, they decided upon a peaceful, cooperative division of power. There would be no more silent revolutions, only a shared sovereignty. The brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, gathered to draw lots, a ceremony that was silent, solemn, and utterly crucial. The act of drawing was simple. 3 hands reaching into a vessel, each grasping for a token that represented an ultimate cosmic domain. There was no struggle, no force, only the quiet acceptance of fate. The tokens were drawn, and the division was established. Zeus drew the largest portion, the vast, limitless sky. His rule became the height, the light, and the atmosphere. His presence is now the sound of the wind, the feel of warm sun on the skin, and the sudden, exhilarating crackle of summer storms. He is the cloud gatherer, the ultimate arbiter, the supreme ruler whose breath smells of high-altitude ozone and majestic power. Poseidon drew the turbulent, ceaseless sea. He is the rhythm of the waves, the immense cold pressure of the deep ocean, and the sudden frothing violence of storms. His domain is endless motion, and his scent is purely of salt, brine, and the wet, wild mystery of the unknown deep. When he is angered,
the very earth trembles with the profound low-frequency rumble of the ocean floor shifting. Hades drew the silent, inescapable underworld. His realm is stillness, depth, and the perpetual, unchanging temperature of the deep earth. It is a place without scent, yet possessing the cold, heavy weight of all that has ever been buried. Hades took his silent throne, the king of the departed, content in his absolute solitude and governance over the final state of all things. They agreed that Gaea, the ancient earth itself, would remain a shared domain, belonging to all, yet ruled by none. And so the new order was born. The 12 Olympians, led by Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, and the others, established their eternal residence high above the clouds. Olympus became a place of dazzling, perfect light and perpetual calm. The sound that predominates here is not battle, but the gentle, melodic clash of metal upon metal, the quiet, ceaseless work of Hephaestus, the smith god, perfecting the armor and tools of a new age. Look now at the resulting cosmos. It is a world of defined boundaries, where the sky is above, the sea rolls between, and the dead rest beneath. The chaos of the beginning has been tamed by the structure of the gods. But as we drift through the shimmering, peaceful halls of Olympus, remember the ultimate lesson whispered by the ancients. The Son defeated the Father not by changing the law of succession, but merely by delaying it. The power that created order was born from betrayal, and the peace that now reigns is built on a silent, terrifying prison beneath the earth. The Titans are sleeping, yes, but the earth sometimes still sighs with their muffled collective groan, a low, constant sound that is the very echo of time. Rest now, knowing that the great battle is finished, and the gods of the new age are watching over your sleep, listening to the gentle tap, tap, tap of time passing, measured now by the slow, steady rhythm of the eternal, ordered cosmos.